I'd like to thank the panelists for today, for taking time to come here. We totally appreciate it. This is the sixth time we've done this. Many of you have been here for several of those. I can't thank you enough, and I think we also need to thank you for the work you guys do. It's amazing, and it's primarily why we're here. I'd also want to thank the City of Saco for co-hosting it and sponsoring with us. Mayor McPhail, our city administrator, is not here yet, but he will be. We're grateful for, being able to use this facility. A couple weeks ago, I was walking in Camp Ellis, and somebody asked me if I was more optimistic or less optimistic than I was a year ago about things happening down here. And my immediate response was that I was less optimistic, but given a chance to think about it, I just understand that we're all going to have to work harder, we're going to have to work smarter, and most importantly, we're going to have to work together. And that's the great thing about this event, is that everybody is here together, and we can share a lot of good ideas, I'm sure. So, a word on the agenda. Pete Slavinsky is going to be our lead speaker, keynoter today. Everybody at this table is going to do a short presentation, and then we'll introduce the guest panel. We'll make sure everybody gets a chance to say what's on their mind and talk, and then Kevin is going to moderate a discussion for whatever time we have left. We are under time constraints, so I ask that we move quickly. Just a reminder to the audience that due to time, we can't take audience questions, but if anybody has anything that we missed, they can email me at info@sossacobay.com, and I will be glad to respond to that. So with that, Pete, you want to come up and start? He'll introduce himself.
So lower the microphone a little bit. Okay, great. Thanks, David. Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know, my name is Peter Slavinsky. I'm a marine geologist at the Maine Geological Survey, and have been working on Camp Ellis erosion issues since about 2001. So definitely not as long as some of you, but longer than others. So it's a pleasure to be here, and David asked me to give you an update, basically, over what happened over the last year. As we know, the winter of late 2023, early 2024 had a series of really powerful storms that were precedent-setting along the Maine coastline. So this year's presentation kind of focuses a little bit on some of the erosion that occurred, and then some of the recovery that occurred, both naturally and also because of some of the efforts by the town and the city and also citizens along the coastline in Saco. Nope, no arrows. How about a page down? Just a page down. Does that need to be? Oh, it's not in presentation mode. That's why, or is it? Yeah, it is. Ah, there we go. Okay, so as part of our Maine Beach Mapping Program, we conduct annual surveys of several different features of the shoreline. And one of the things we monitor is how the dunes, or your protective dunes, your barriers to ocean storms change. So this is kind of a transect of what we're monitoring. For example, if that's the toe of the dune in 2023, what we're calculating is where is that toe of the dune in summer of 2024? Okay, so it gives us an indication of how much dune erosion or accretion has occurred. The next thing we look for is basically where is the mean high water line along the shore, the stretch of the shoreline. And again, we're looking at how that high water line is changing from 2023 to 2024. Okay, so we're measuring the distance of where it was in 2023 to where it is in 2024. And the final factor that we look at is something called dry beach width, and that's the width of your protective beach. So think of it as your first buffer before the waves reach the dunes. It's how wide is the beach, how protective is it, so that waves can dissipate before they even reach dunes. So again, that's kind of it, and it's the distance from the mean high water contour to the toe of the dune or seawall. So if it's like that in 2023, then we're comparing it to what is it in 2024. Okay, so there's three characteristics we're going to look at along the Saco shoreline. So the way we present these results is kind of the whole Saco shoreline, and it's color-coded into greens, yellows, and reds, with greens being typical shoreline growth, yellows being loss, and reds being a lot of loss. So I have some good things to report here. So this is, again, looking at June 2023 to June of 2024. If you recall from our last session that we had last year, I showed you some results from the storms. And along the Saco shoreline, the erosion averaged between 30 and 35 feet, okay? So that was the loss between June and March when we did our measurements. Now we're looking at June to June. So the statewide average was about 26 feet of dune loss. So along the northern stretch, which we've divvied up the shoreline to Bayview to Kinney Shores, that was about 15 feet of dune loss. So still quite a bit of loss. But there was recovery because of the activities that were undertaken along a lot of properties, and we'll get into that a little bit. And along Camp Ellis to Ferry Beach, it was about almost 18 feet of dune loss. So let's take a look at the northern end. You can see a wide variety and a couple pockets of what I would call hotspot erosion near the Goose Fair Brook, and then closer to the one seawall that exists kind of in the middle of the beach there. The rest of those values are between about 5 and 15 feet, so pretty consistent in terms of the loss of dune. But what this also reflects is, again, a lot of the plantings that occurred that brought the dune back seaward. So this would have been worse had those plantings not occurred. Along the southern stretch of the shoreline from about that seawall I described all the way down to Eagle Avenue, you can see that the erosion was worst at the northern end of the beach there. So anywhere from 15 to almost 40 feet of loss. Okay, that's quite a bit. And that's even reflective of some restoration that has occurred. The rest of the shoreline there, where additional restoration occurred in some areas, lost about 5 to 10 feet, roughly. Now, when we look at beach changes, again, that's how the mean high water contour changed from June 2023 to June 2024. Statewide average was about 14 feet of beach loss. Again, during this season, we undergo dramatic beach changes, but since we're comparing kind of June to June, you don't really see those dramatic changes. You see some loss, more loss in the northern end of the beach than the southern end of the beach. At the northern end of the beach, you can see some variation where we had some gains in the middle of the beach area right here, and then relatively consistent losses along the other stretch, but some stability along this stretch in here, but pockets of erosion where the orange is telling you that beach loss was about minus 20 feet. So that's simply how the mean high water contour moved landward, okay, in response to the massive amounts of erosion that we saw in the storms. For the southern end of the beach, the changes were a little bit less. They're more pronounced at the kind of northern section of the beach, and that's because there's natural dune in that area, while once you get down to roughly Fairhaven Avenue, it transitions mostly to seawall, so there really isn't that much beach change that can occur because the seawall kind of inhibits how the beach can migrate landward. In terms of dry beach width change, this is the one really good thing that came out of this, all right? There was a lot of growth, or at least gain, in the dry beach width. So your protective dry beach was very, very wide, and you may have noticed that this summer. And there's a couple reasons for that. We'll get into that. But the average was about 9 feet for the state, but about 5 feet at the northern end of the beach and about 7 feet on average for the southern end of the beach. At the northern end, again, you can see a lot of variability here, some end effect loss adjacent to the seawalls, but then there's the rest. There's a pretty good gain of dry beach width, and then a loss at the edge of Goose Fair Brook. At the southern end, pretty much consistent gain in terms of the dry beach, for the most part, with some pockets of loss. Okay, so why did we see dramatic dry beach growth if we saw dune loss and beach loss? Might be one of your questions. Well, there's a reason for that. Again, how we define dry beach width, it's the distance from the mean high water contour to either the toe of the seawall or toe of the dune, just like shown in this image. So if we have lots of dune loss, like we did, upwards of 20 feet, 30 feet in some areas, if you think about it, if your dune erodes landward, and then your beach only erodes 5 or 10 feet, and then comes back the next year, you're going to have a wider dry beach. That's exactly what happened. So it's a little false to say that we gained beach, but in a way we did because the dunes eroded so much, if that makes sense. So that's a good thing because it shows that the sand came back after being lost during the winter storm. So it was pulled offshore, was lost, and then it came back. Okay? So even though the dunes haven't rebuilt themselves besides where a lot of folks did restoration projects, the dry beach is showing that the sand came back. So it's available to the system. That's a really important finding. So this is kind of just a summary of those changes. I'm not going to really read through these because we kind of went through them, but I think one of the important things to note is that beach recovery, in terms of that dry beach width, is really, really important finding. But it's going to take your dunes a couple seasons to recover. Okay? They don't recover in 1 year. So how have we done from June to March? So this is, you see a little dune restoration project on the left-hand side, a pier that was clearly washed out, but you can see dune restoration underneath it and also to the north of it. So this is, again, those changes from June through March of 2025, and I have to thank UNE for the aerial imagery that we did this analysis with. So overall, the dunes were relatively stable from June through March. Okay, that lends itself to the fact that we haven't had huge storms this winter, and a lot of the work that was done stayed in place. But that's what that's showing us. There are pockets of erosion, but the majority of where the dune line was in June is roughly where it is in March of 2025. So that's a good thing. Same thing in the southern end. You have pockets of some loss, but it's offset by pockets of accretion. So the net change there is actually 0. In terms of beach change, there has been some loss at the northern end especially. And again, this is a seasonal signature. Every season we have loss of the beach because the beach gets chewed away, the sand gets pulled offshore into sandbars, stored offshore, and then it returns the following season. So this is not anything to get really too worried about. There's areas of gain, especially near Goose Fair Brook, that offset some of these losses, but you can see the majority of these losses are roughly at about the middle section of the northern end of the beach up to almost Shore Avenue. Okay? The southern end of the beach was much more stable, pockets of loss, but pretty stable along the majority of it, with just only about a 1-foot change overall. In terms of dry beach width changes, this again is where we've seen some losses. Okay, that makes sense because during the winter month, the dunes and the beach get chewed away, sand pulled offshore, and then they come back hopefully in the springtime. Average is about 6 feet of loss. Again, the majority of it is concentrated right in this central section of the northern area, but it's offset by a lot of changes up here. And in the southern stretch, it's relatively stable. These yellow colors show anything from 0 to about 10 feet of loss. So it could be 0 or it could be 10 feet, with an average of about 3 feet. And again, not too much change along the seawalled sections because there isn't too much beach to change over there. So markedly stable dunes since June. That's a great thing. Beach erosion was pretty varied, but there was an overall slight loss in beach. Again, not startling because we expect that to happen during winter months. And dry beach width showed a loss also. And again, that's not unexpected. So my final slide kind of reiterates a lot of the considerations that we talked about last year. And it shows you some of the successes, I think, that the community had, which was restore those dunes. It's important. There are now new permitting that is a little bit potentially easier to get for beach scraping, for moving sand around on the beach, for restoring your dunes. And building primary and secondary dune ridges is pretty important. A lot of folks try to hold the line on the seaward side, and that worked pretty well this winter. But if we have to consider that to be dynamic and ephemeral. That's going to get lost. So if we're going to be doing large dune restoration projects, let's try to incorporate it farther in the backside of the dune so it has more ability to be stable. And it's pretty important to try to, and Art could talk about this a little bit, but there's more and more focus of actually meeting certain standards in terms of rebuilding dunes to meet FEMA standards. Limiting individual footpaths or actually making them more resilient by either curving them or zigzagging them, very important. We showed that in the March, our last analysis, that everywhere you had a walkover was a place where erosion was even worse. And the final one was closing off streets during storms. The community already does a pretty good job with that. So that's our final consideration, and I hope I didn't go over time. I can't get off the last slide, so I'm assuming that's it. Thanks, everyone. We're doing questions now?
No. I think what we'll do is we'll hold questions for the presenters till after they've all presented, and then if there are questions from the panel, you can ask at that point. So Will, you're right there. You can introduce yourself.
All right.
And thank you for coming.
Thank you, David, and thank you, everyone. This is always a wonderful meeting. Looking forward to this conversation. Thank you, David, for organizing. My name is Will Katitsky. I'm an assistant professor at the University of New England. I have the great pleasure of getting to work with awesome students at UNE doing all kinds of different things. And so what I'm showing you here is kind of our two primary methods that we've been using to help monitor beaches in this area that I want to tell you a little bit of our work about. We have multiple drones. The one that you're seeing on the left primarily works by taking pictures, stitching those pictures together in a technique we call photogrammetry. It's relatively easy to do. The one on the right is a LiDAR drone. It basically uses a laser to take 250,000 pulses of light each second to measure elevation really precisely across the beach. And so I want to show you some of what we're doing with these. First, thank you, Pete, for your presentation. It is entirely consistent with what we're finding. So I want to try to highlight mostly some of the ways in which we're collecting slightly different data sets that are very complementary to MGS, but entirely consistent with what we see. We saw, to put it in a different number than what Pete gave you, we saw about 4 acres of dune lost in the Saco coastline in the January 2024 storms. For perspective, that kind of the normalized loss, we saw very similar between Saco and Hills Beach, but it was probably about 25% or a third of the loss in Saco and Hills Beach as we saw in Fortunes, Fortunes Rocks, Middle Beach, Biddeford Pool Beach, Goose Rocks Beach. They were hit much worse. And if you notice, the two things that immediately should stand out in your mind about the difference between those beaches is the aspect, right? This was a southeasterly storm that really hit those beaches hard. Saco and Hills Beach are, with a different orientation, just were a little more protected, and so we didn't see quite as much damage from this past storm. We did see a lot of recovery from after the storm until this fall, but we still have a net loss of the dunes of 2.4 acres from last year, from before the storm. From September to now, we're seeing slight losses of volume of sand on Ferry Beach, and we're seeing a slight gain at Camp Ellis. These are very slight and very seasonal. We're going to see that continue to change. We saw a recovery of about 50,000 cubic yards of sand near Bayview, just near Bayview from February to September. So just to give you a sense of what some of our results look like, rather than dune length or dry beach width changes, I'm showing you really height loss. So this is the very southern portion of Ferry Beach, right next to Camp Ellis. And so you can see from the storm where we're getting just over a meter of dune loss there. So about 3-4 feet of loss right at the edge of the dune system. We can contrast that then with the gains that we saw from February to September. We saw relatively little recovery of the dunes in this area, so still a big net loss of the dune area, but you do see some of that sand coming back. And just in the interest of time, I could show you this for the entire beach. If anyone's interested in seeing these, kind of looking at the height the height changes in detail, very happy to go through that, but just want to keep it brief today. I just want to end on some of the lessons that we've learned from looking at other beaches in this region. We saw this really great case study looking at what happened in Biddeford on Fortunes Rocks, Middle Beach, and Biddeford Pool beaches, where the coastline is just so diverse and people took different approaches. So some people scraped and planted, other people did nothing. And so that really allowed us to understand the impact of these different techniques on the beach. And we saw where people scraped, we saw a 90% increase in the height of the dune after scraping compared to people who did nothing. So 90% more sand in the dune system when you scrape. That comes at a cost, though. So the beaches that did not see any scraping, they were 8% higher than the beaches that did see scraping. So we get 90% gain in the dunes at a cost of 8% reduction on the beach. Those numbers, right, those should not be viewed equally because the dune is a much smaller area. So it's probably about the same volume of sand. We're still working on that calculation. It's a little hard to tell, but scraping works and getting sand back into the dunes for sure. So thank you.
Ryan, do you want to? No, you can do it from here.
No presentation from me. I'm Brian Ambret. I'm the Climate Resilience Coordinator in the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future. I'm glad to be back here, I think, for the 4th year or so. So I will give an update, as I usually do, on some of the grant funding that's available for communities for this kind of work, and then I want to talk for just a moment about some of the policy happenings that are going on in Augusta. My office, as many of you are familiar, runs a program called the Community Resilience Partnership. It's a grant program for communities in Maine to take actions related to community resilience, clean energy, energy efficiency, that kind of work. City of Saco has participated in several rounds of this grant, and they have an application into this round, I believe, for some of this beach work. We hope to make awards out of this current round that we're evaluating right now within the next 4 to 6 weeks or so stay tuned. The good news is we have some pretty robust funding for this round and for future rounds as well. This round we expect to award about $8 million statewide. In the next round, we'll have the $3 million annual allocation from the state's general fund, and then supplementing that with about $2.25 million from the very large grant that Maine got from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, last year. We expect that NOAA funding to continue for the next 3 years at this point. It's a 5-year grant. We're going to make 4 years worth of awards out of that money. So that's the great news. The Maine Infrastructure Adaptation Fund has also received about $20 million of funding from that NOAA award. The State Department of Transportation will be running that grant program as they have for the last couple of years. They're still determining whether they're going to do 1 round or 2 rounds out of that $20 million, but we do expect 1 round to happen some point this year. So stay tuned for information on the Infrastructure Adaptation Fund. On the policy side, a couple of important things going on in Augusta right now. The first is a commission that many of you could be familiar with. It's the Infrastructure Rebuilding and Resilience Commission that was established by the governor last May after the storms to really examine where the state can do more work, where we need more resources, where we need to make investments around rebuilding from extreme weather events and then building our long-term resiliency to these kinds of events. That commission issued some interim recommendations last November, and will issue a final report in just a couple of weeks, in the middle of May. The good news is those interim recommendations have already started to yield some results in the form of LD1, which was the first bill to come out this session. It was a governor's bill that had bipartisan support from the leaders of both the House and the Senate, and will do 3 things. First, it will establish a homeowners resiliency program, which will help homeowners through grants to put stronger roofs on their house or to flood-proof their basements. The second thing it will do is put some resources into MEMA to help shore up the disaster recovery fund which is where the state gets its portion of the match for local cost share, or I'm sorry, non-federal cost share, when we have storm damage that FEMA reimburses the state and communities for. Also at MEMA, it will invest in upgrades to communications and early warning systems so that we can get better communications out to town leaders and to residents in a timely manner during an emergency and immediately after. And then it will put up some funding to leverage additional federal funding for a program called the Safeguarding Tomorrow State Revolving Loan Fund. This would be a loan fund that communities could access to do hazard mitigation projects, resiliency and adaptation projects. It's a loan program that usually comes with fairly favorable terms for communities. And this would be putting up the state's 10% match to be able to pull some federal funding into that program. And then as those loans get repaid, it's a self-sustaining program that builds over time. The third component and the last component of LD1 is where we'll establish a state resiliency office to really coordinate a lot of these efforts and invest in additional mapping and capabilities around understanding where flood risk is in the state. That's both riverine and coastal flooding. Many of you will know that there's a sea level rise mapping modeling project underway with DOT. Pete is involved in that. I'm involved in that. We hope that that modeling project will yield some results by the end of this year, and then into next year we'll start pulling in additional parts of the state. We believe that there's a need on the inland side for riverine flooding to understand the same type of risks that we have along the coastline, help our communities inland have better information around where flood risk is and how they can adapt and respond to that. And then the last piece of that third component is investing in capacity in our communities in Maine, supporting each of our regional councils. So in this region, it's the Southern Maine Planning and Development Group with certified floodplain managers to help communities have access to the resources, the expertise that they need to plan for floods, to help understand where that flood risk is and ways that they can mitigate it. So LD1 is super exciting. It's nice to see something coming out of this commission work so soon, even though the final report hasn't been released, but LD1 is very responsive to some of the preliminary recommendations. There's much more work to do on the data side, on the capacity building side, on the long-term investment side, and we think the commission's report will put some important information out there for the legislature and the governor to consider going forward. So I think I'll stop there. Thanks, David.
Lori, do you want to? Is that? Okay. I'll use these arrows.
I'm glad he's doing this and it's not me.
This is not my. Just use these arrows here.
Okay,
Cool. Thank you.
cool. Well, there. Hi, good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Hi, I know it's Monday. I am Lori Gramlich, and I am currently the Assistant Majority Leader in the Maine State House of Representatives. I had previously served on the Environment and Natural Resources Committee for the last 6 years. Most recently, I was the House Chair of that committee, and I'll tell you, I miss doing that work a great deal. I also want to add that Brian's always a tough act to follow because he steals a lot of my thunder, but that's okay. Sometimes repetition is great. So I really want to thank Kevin and David and all of you who have organized this today. We've done a lot on the state level. If I look down, can you all hear me okay? So we know coastal erosion is not just an environmental challenge, it's an economic and social issue that impacts communities, infrastructure, local ecosystems. We all saw firsthand last year the devastation of what this means in our community. So let's see here, I gotta go. There we go. I got it, thanks. So what are the implications of coastal erosion in the state of Maine? We know that there's loss of shoreline and habitat, and that includes erosion of beaches and bluffs, impact on wetlands. The threat to coastal infrastructure includes damage to homes and buildings. Again, we saw that firsthand this past winter, last year. The cost of protection and repair, which was significant in our community, not only in this Saco Bay region, generally speaking, but certainly in my community of Old Orchard Beach and more pointedly Ocean Park. The economic impact, again, it was significant in our community. Increased storm surge and flooding, that was really the biggest indicator that we saw. In addition to, obviously, the coastal erosion, it was the enormous storm surge and flooding that really had the most devastating impact on our community. Changes in coastal geology, as Peter's already talked about, and others have talked about in terms of how that has an impact on what we're doing and how we look at it. Climate change amplification, warming waters, rising temperatures. Some of you have probably heard this data point that the Gulf of Maine is warming 99% quicker than any other body of water in the world. There's all kinds of reasons, but climate change is a big contributor to that. Changing weather patterns, we see that all the time. Limited resource for mitigation, certainly we are making efforts to mitigate that, but it has been a challenge with regard to how we're going to make up the loss of what we experienced, particularly in the last cycle, and the impact on local communities. Again, what we saw in our community was significant. Displacement of coastal communities and the cultural impact. Erosion threatens the preservation of these areas, including historical sites, lighthouses, and other landmarks to define Maine's coastal heritage. So what's the cost of doing nothing? The cost of not adapting to a changing climate is large and will accelerate over time. Fortunately, the state of Maine has taken some initiatives in this regard. So what can we do? As Brian already talked about, we have some administrative and legislative solutions. The governor has had this squarely on her focus and agenda for quite some time, as long as she has been serving with regard to initiating the Maine Won't Wait Maine Climate Council. There was just an update done last year about next steps. Brian already highlighted on some of those during his presentation. He also talked about the Maine Community Resilience Partnership. This just gives you a graphic of who has been able to take advantage of these opportunities on the state level. For example, my community of Old Orchard Beach received $35,000 to help improve energy efficiency within our municipal facilities and buildings, to include energy audits and an implementation plan for energy efficiency upgrades and weatherization, which is significant. As Brian discussed, LD1 was the governor's initiative. It was the first bill that got presented to us in the legislature. It's entitled An Act to Increase Storm Preparedness for Maine's Communities, Homes, and Infrastructure. As Brian talked about, there's an emphasis on the home resiliency program. We want to empower homeowners to take action so we can significantly reduce losses and insurance costs. So we've got a number of grant opportunities that are embedded into that particular initiative of the bill. Additionally, enhanced hazard mitigation and resources and statewide communications. So we've got investments into the State Disaster Recovery Fund. We've established and capitalized new state funding to match federal funding. And we're trying to enhance our emergency communication system so that we can ensure communities are better equipped to respond to disasters. Finally, the State Resilience Office and Flood Ready Maine program is also embedded into this particular piece of legislation. So with the establishment of new State Resilience Office within the Maine Office of Community Affairs, we will be able to support planning efforts to reduce flood and storm damage. So we're trying, as you know, the flood maps have been updated. I think last year, I actually spoke to our town manager about the impact in my community, particularly in Ocean Park, and I live about 0.8 of a mile from the beach on Temple Avenue in Old Orchard Beach, and my home is now in the flood map, in the zone. So it's going to have a greater impact as we move forward. LD1 has had a number of work sessions. They just had another work session last week. It was tabled so that the committee could continue to do its work. It has not been reported out yet, but we do anticipate a favorable outcome. This is a particular piece of legislation that has garnered bipartisan support. Other initiatives that we have been able to take on, one is LD 228, an act to allow coastal seawalls to be raised up to 2 feet in order to accommodate predicted sea level rise. This is a particular piece of legislation that was sponsored by my colleague out of Wells, Representative Bob Foley. I'm pleased to be a co-sponsor, as is Senator Bailey, on this particular piece of legislation. As many of you may know, in 1978, after the 1978 floods, NARPA disallowed seawalls. So one of the responses that we saw last year with all the floods was, well, let's just build more seawalls or build them up. We're not allowed to do that by Department of Environmental Protection rules. However, this particular piece of legislation amends the Natural Resources Protection Act to authorize the department to approve permit or permit by rule opportunities. So these are for seawalls that are already in existence on January 1st, 2025. The height of the seawall can be no more than 2 feet, and the seawall otherwise meets all applicable requirements adopted by the department by rule. So this is an exciting piece of legislation. It builds on a piece of legislation that I submitted last year with regard to helping to build up the dunes, because we know that if we protect the dunes, that's going to be at least one tool in our toolbox to mitigate some of the rising sea and flood that we've seen over the past several years. This bill has been worked a number of times in the Environment and Natural Resources Committee. There will be another work session this Wednesday on it. There's some minor amendments. Again, this is a bipartisan piece of legislation, and we anticipate a favorable response from this particular bill. Finally, LD 488 is an act to protect coastal property by allowing property owners to protect their existing dwellings. This particular bill allows for new seawalls and coastal dune systems, and what I just identified is that coastal sand dune rules, which have been in effect since 1983, prohibit the construction of new seawalls, and that's particularly what this piece of legislation does. There was a report out of the Environment and Natural Resources Committee just last week. It was an ought not to pass, a divided report along party lines. I think that the committee, and certainly I can't speak for them since I don't serve on that committee any longer, but I think that the committee and certainly the administration feel very strongly that the previous piece of legislation, LD 228, will help to mitigate some of this. And we don't, the problem with seawalls is that they actually end up having an adverse impact to coastal wetlands, so they don't really do what they're intended to do. So in conclusion, as identified, coastal erosion in Maine presents a complex issue. We are working on the state level to address this. I'm very optimistic that we're going to be able to advance some of these particular policy initiatives. It is certainly something, as I identified, that is on the governor's priority list, and it is certainly on the legislature's priority list, and certainly for the folks that live in this community, because we've seen firsthand the devastation that sea level rise can cause. So thank you very much.
Nathan, I'm going to bring you up next. So, since it's Nathan's from DEP, so I figured it was a good segue from what Lori just had to say. So, yeah, thanks, David. Thank you.
All right, and I've just got glasses for the first time this week, so we get used to that too. It was about time. So thanks, David. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, I'm Nathan Robbins. I work as the climate change specialist with the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, and I'm going to add to all the great points that were already made. To situate this just quickly in some of the planning that was talked about, Maine won't wait in 2020, the update to it in 2024, and then the Infrastructure and Rebuilding and Resilience Commission, which was also mentioned. Just pulling out some pieces about infrastructure with respect to regulations and land use regulations and tools. There was in the 2020 plan, call out to adopt official sea level rise projections, to update our land use planning sort of broadly regulatory reform, and to do that sort of consistently across a lot of our agencies. That we have sort of a lot of progress to talk about. I think this has already been sort of reported on each year at these symposiums, so I'm going to try to add just some of the new updates to that. One of which is in the 2024 Maine Won't Wait update was to sort of engage more on the full spectrum of adaptation solutions. So commonly think about that as these 4 options, which is either to avoid or do nothing, to protect, which is sort of keeping water out, sort of staying in place and keeping water out, accommodate or adapt, which is living with water. Where these are just sort of ways to think about it, those phrasing of keeping water out, living with water, or to move out of the water's way, which would be remove or relocate. And so a lot, I think, over the context of the last couple of years, and especially with the storms that we saw, there's been a lot more discussion about engaging with the full spectrum of adaptation options and thinking about the way we develop our shorelines with a little bit more long-term planning in mind. And more specifically, recently, thinking about what are the different practices that are of interest when we think about building more resiliently, building back better, or those kinds of thoughts, approaches. And one of the ways that we've been thinking about that at DEP and with our other natural resource agency partners is what are the types of practices that people are looking to do, and how can we expedite those from a regulatory perspective? So one of my roles at the department is to help identify barriers to adaptation and work to remove those, which is why I'm here sort of speaking about some of those pieces. And I'll just add that I'm in a non-regulatory position, so that's interesting to think about, like, why is this person up here talking about land use regulations? And of course, we have to sort of do that together across, using our collective resources at the department and with our partners. And I'll just add that in the back row over here, we have several folks from DEP in our Land Bureau, and maybe they just want to raise their hand. So for a lot of the technical questions, or just as you have thoughts and want to connect with folks today, just want to point out we have a number of colleagues here. So I'm just going to hit on a few of the recent changes. I think in general, a lot, it's helpful to think about our regulations as in sort of 3 thresholds, and this may be overly generalizing it, but when we think about practices, what people are looking to build, rebuild, that's either exempt, that's permit by rule, which is under the Natural Resources Protection Act, which is really a streamlined process, a much quicker review, lower cost, or a full individual Natural Resources Protection Act permit. And so over time, we've been thinking about which practices can become exempt or which ones could become streamlined through the PBR process versus which ones really require an individual NRPA permit. They make more substantial changes on the landscape. So I want to just call out one interesting one that I think was really prompted by the storms of last year, which was LD 2030, which allowed the increasing of a height of a pier, wharf, or dock when repairing, so up to 4 feet, which is a pretty significant change, and I think really was prompted by the storm recovery efforts. So, we learn a lot, right, with these storms, and at the department we're really thinking about, again, how can we learn from those practices and streamline them? So in this case, it was increasing height of piers, wharves, or docks up to 4 feet. Another one I just wanted to call out is I'm just going to keep moving here on the sand dune pieces. So it was mentioned already that we can't build a sand dune. We can't build a new wall in a sand dune, and it was sort of mentioned some of the reasons why that it can be fairly counterproductive. But we did, it is possible to rebuild an existing wall, and really what we're talking about there is trying to keep it in the same dimensions. And if that's looking to be, so that can be done sort of as an emergency repair. You can keep it in the same dimensions, or you can do a permit by rule in the repair or replace in the same dimensions. But if you're looking to make it larger, that's really an individual permit. And this is where LD 228 comes in, which was just mentioned, in terms of allowing for a one-time height increase to a seawall. And so we would currently look at that through our sand dune rules and actually allow some dimensional changes to that wall in height, and but typically are looking for people to push that design sort of to more of an angled slope, or just ways to minimize that structure impact on the environment. A little bit more on dunes. There was another fairly significant change. This has to do with more of the streamlining of sort of best practices, where we allowed now under 16, permit by rule 16A, and I think this was mentioned earlier too by Pete about sort of encouraging native dune vegetation and the use of biodegradable and natural materials for restoration is under an individual sand dune permit. So we're looking for, again, for ways to sort of streamline these activities. And we also updated the definition of sand dunes. So instead of sort of just thinking about it in terms of where they were, typically it was just focused more on southern Maine, I guess really is how we were thinking about sand dunes, but of course there's sand dunes statewide. So we've sort of updated the way that we look at those from a definitional standpoint, and refer to MGS for looking at those sand dune maps and where they are, but also by definition. And so that's really looking at dunes statewide. Just switching a little bit to shoreline stabilization more broadly, and not just thinking about them in dunes. Again, so thinking like in the bluffed habitats, we've, generally you can repair, it's exempt to repair a wall or a stabilization rather, in one of these environments if it's less than 50%. If it's more than that, but you don't exceed any of the dimensional requirements, then it's a permit by rule. But if you're expanding, then it's going to be an individual permit. And I think a couple of key points here is that, if the damage was sort of pushes that material into the wetland, it has to get put back into the previous location. It needs to be, again, the same dimensions, but you can move it landward. And there is an emergency stabilization if it's less than 25 feet. That's just a sort of general rule of thumb if you have a structure less than 25 feet. And then currently we are proposing regulations. We introduced those to the Board of Environmental Protection in November, and we anticipate to go back to the board with responses to the comments that we've received in this spring, maybe in April or in May. The idea behind these is to really encourage the use of more like living shoreline techniques, and to help sort of promote those through a permit by rule practice. It doesn't really take the tools off the like out of the toolkit, so to speak. It just sort of emphasizes in the use of more living shoreline techniques or use of biodegradable materials. We're also working on some guidance to develop to sort of assist with the assessment of shoreline stabilization, looking at which we're calling RShore, which is a program that's been developed for the last couple of years, and we hope to have this guide out in the coming months in a sort of next iteration. But the idea behind this guide is to help individual property owners assess the sources of erosion and to get guided to different erosion control practices that are that can mitigate those, but while also sort of encouraging the role of vegetation or hybrid practices as a solution. And it's really about treating the entire slope from overland to the bank to the water, and trying to find the appropriate practices for for reducing erosion. There's an assessment method here called OUR, which is really about the sort of designing, sort of before you even think about treating the slope or even trying to deal with erosion control, you just look at and observe and look for the sort of least level of intervention and sort of scale up from there. And again, it goes through the sources of different erosion and then comes up with various practices. And it's about educating about what, it'll include case studies, a lot of pictures from Maine about what people are actually doing so we can share more best practices. And just a reminder that there are lots of things that you can do, maybe either without a permit that are exempt or with a permit by rule process, and a number of those have to do with vegetation in the upland, or it was already mentioned too about the meander pathways and how that can be very effective to reducing erosion. So we're just really trying to promote the importance of looking at land use from the entire site, not just treating the bank, but also the importance of overland erosion and mitigating that, because that can be a substantial contributor to erosion and be a sort of low permit activities or no permit activities to help. Just in the works, we have an interagency regulatory forum that we've stood up with our natural resource agencies. We're trying to identify the different practices that are of use and where there's that are, people are thinking about doing, that there may be a barrier to implementation, either in the language itself in rule or statute, or also that could be improved on just understanding what the way the regulations work currently through improved guidance. So that could be, some of the topics we're already thinking about are elevating roads, shoreline stabilization, elevating piers and wharves. So there's just a number of discussions, and we're looking to help inform those through some various focus groups. We are developing the Our Shore Guide. We're updating our shoreline zoning handbook currently, and we're looking to create a resilient Maine design guide, which would roll up various best practices that are being used throughout the state. Shore Corps Steward is like an AmeriCorps Steward. There's 4 host sites in Maine that are going to be bringing on Shore Corps Stewards this year, and we have funding for that program for the next 5 years, currently through the NOAA Resilience Grant that the state received. They're going to be assisting property owners with our shore assessments and helping design shoreline stabilization projects. They'll also be installing demonstration projects as a cohort. And there's the Coastal Sand Dune Restoration and Protection Fund, which we received funding for and are going to be evaluating those projects currently. So that's a lot. There's a lot more links for information, and just wouldn't be possible with all the input from discussions like this. Thank you.
So we've been doing a lot of work with the county on beach management. We're really fortunate to have Lauren Folkert here. Lauren's an engineer. She'll explain her role and has a pretty interesting presentation.
Hi, everyone. As David said, I'm an engineer. I work for Anchor QEA, and I'm working with the Emergency Management Agency on the York County Coastal Resilience Initiative. So I'm going to go over the county's resilience efforts, some of the guidance for the FEMA Category B standards for dunes, and then moving forward, FEMA Category G standards for beaches. So what drove this effort was the storms that happened in January. There was about $42 million in estimated damages in structures and infrastructure. In addition to the damages in structure and infrastructure, there was damages to the natural features, the dunes and beaches. So these are also eligible for FEMA funding. And while these aren't actual structures or infrastructures, it's important, these are important features because of the first line of defense for storm surge and significant wave height. So why is York County leading the Coastal Resilience Initiative? So at the county government level, York County has a scale and bandwidth necessary to successfully lead this management project. A lot of the towns are already strained both financially and resources to for the impacted infrastructure, so the beaches just will add a next level of effort. York County has already established some relationships on the ground to make it work and are moving in the right direction. And also, York County has already gone through the federal procurement process to procure engineering and contractors. So there's a time savings associated with putting together RFPs and also a cost savings associated with if a few projects are lined up and they already have one contractor to do it, there's some mobilization cost savings associated with that. So immediately the county is working on FEMA Category B standards, which is protective measures to protect against a 5-year storm, and Category G, which is long-term measures that will provide protection against a 100-year storm. So in a typical beach profile, the Category B funding is only going to be looking at damages above the mean high water level in the dunes, while Category G with the entire beach will be looking at the landward side of the dune, on the berm, and all the way out to the closure depth, which, as Pete was saying earlier, sand moves dynamically on and off the beach throughout the year. That's just natural, so all sand on the beach and within where sediment stops moving within that closure depth is what will be considered for future Category G beaches. So if a natural or engineered beach has eroded to a point where flooding from a 5-year storm, sand dunes to protect against additional damage from a 5-year storm is eligible for public assistance funding from FEMA. So what FEMA does to look at what sand is eligible for that is you take the pre-incident profile and post-incident profile. If you calculate the still water level associated with a 5-year storm, add the wave run-up associated with the 5-year storm to get the total water level, and all sand between the post-incident profile and the total water level is eligible for funding. So costs reimbursed by FEMA, and what we've done to date is taken topographic surveys on the beach, and then we compared the 2024 data to 2020 publicly available LiDAR data as a pre-storm survey, sand borrow source investigations. So FEMA requires that sand put on the beach are similar in texture and color to the source sand. So we took some samples to get the grain size distribution and color confirmed on the beach and compared that to sand sources, whether it's sand scraping, an upland sand source, or utilizing dredge material beneficially to be placed on the beach. So those dredge sources in town harbors and marinas. Coastal modeling and engineering report. So just getting a little technical. To calculate the still water level, we use the Army Corps' North Atlantic Coastal Comprehensive Study to find wave heights and still water levels associated with a 5-year storm. We used a 2D model to propagate the waves from an offshore source, from an offshore point to a nearshore point, and then used an ACES model to calculate the wave run-up associated with it. FEMA will also pay for permitting, which is the permit by rule for dune restoration. Also, if we're utilizing an offshore source, the permitting associated with dredging and construction. So FEMA will reimburse the sand placement and also planting associated with the dune restoration. So here's just an example from Wells Beach. The dashed black line is a 2020 LiDAR. The blue line's a 2024 surface. So this is an area where there was significant sand loss. So we calculated the still water level at 7 feet, the wave run up at 6.1 feet. So at this particular point in Wells, they were eligible for sand placement up to 13.1 feet. So as with climate change and sea level rise, there will most likely be more frequent storms and more frequent declared emergencies. The goal of York County is to get the beaches to a point where they're eligible for Category G funding, which would be not just restoration of the dunes, but also beach nourishment as necessary after a major storm. So some of the points to make the beaches eligible is one, it can't be a federally constructed shoreline under the authority of the USACE. The beach has to have engineered plans, which is dune heights, widths, berm heights, widths, and slopes. The applicant has to establish and adhere to a maintenance program, which involves periodic nourishment to preserve the design. And the amount eligible for replacement is limited to the loss during the incident. So FEMA considers all sand from the dunes to the closure depth part of the eligible sand. And as Pete was talking about earlier, the sand on offshore naturally moves on the beach and offshore. So when we make these designs, we're going to consider that sand movement. We're not going to try to just make a giant beach and have the towns and county pay for a ridiculous amount of sand on the beach. It's going to be looking at the entire system, offshore and onshore. And some considerations to move forward with Category G. So the towns are going to have to put together beach monitoring and maintenance plans. So that's going to include both some work that some universities are doing and Maine Geological Survey is already doing with the beach monitoring upland. It's also going to have to include bathymetric surveys to monitor the offshore sand that's moving on and off the beach each year, seeking sand borrow sources, utilizing some of the existing town dredging areas and upland borrow sand sources is reasonable up to a few tens of thousands cubic yards, but after that, it's infeasible to use an upland borrow source. So possibly seeking and permitting offshore borrow sources that can have a higher quantity of sand if needed during an emergency event, coordination with property owners. The town beaches are a mix between private and public parcels, so coordinating with private property owners to establish like temporary easements, habitat agreements, and making sure everyone's on board with doing a large-scale beach nourishment project, and also obtaining comprehensive permits for dredging and beach nourishment with the state, the Army Corps, so that the beach is permitted for up to a certain amount of either upland sand or dredge material in case of the next emergency event. And that's what I have.
Okay, so thank you for everybody who got up in front of here today and presented. I think it was highly informative, and I hope everybody got something out of that. I'll open it up briefly for questions. If anybody on the panel or the guest panel has questions, you can ask them now. If not, I will proceed to let each one of the guest panelists introduce themselves and give me one thought that will be a benefit to all of us. So I'll start with you, Pete. You can share the microphone, please, so everybody can hear you. You don't have to stand up. You can do it right from your chair.
Peter Hanrahan, Hanrahan Environmental. Just wanted to let everybody know that the 4th annual SOS Saco Bay Coastal Conference will be held on October 7th in Saco. And I'm going to add that last year we increased our attendance by 65%. So obviously people are concerned about this issue. Look forward to seeing you all there. And bring all your friends and their friends.
Before you hand that off, Pete, can you tell us if you're working on anything of interest right now? Pete runs an environmental services company. Does a lot of speaking and teaching.
Yeah, I think one of the real interest areas for me is going on offense against sea level rise, and that's wave attenuation, which a lot of people associate with these wave attenuation devices, but wave attenuation is a lot more than that, as illustrated by what Peter Slavinsky was talking about earlier, of things like using Christmas trees and so forth to actually accrete sand and build up beaches. So to me, wave attenuation is one of the more exciting things because it's one of the very few opportunities we have to go on offense against sea level rise. You've got drift fence, which catches sand. That's offensive. That's actually building something. Virtually everything else we do is defensive in nature. So those are of interest to me, and that's kind of what I'm working on right now.
Thank you. Go ahead, Pam.
Hi, my name's Pamela Buck. I'm the state representative for Senator Collins' office, covering York County, office location right on Main Street in Biddeford. The question a lot of people have been asking me is we didn't close the government down Friday. We had a continued resolution. We have a new administration that wanted a clean budget. With that being said, fiscal year 25 CDSs, which your big one is the one between Army Corps Engineering and Saco, there was a $25 million CDS. It was finalizing designs and paying for the actual construction for the new spur jetty, in which everybody's been waiting for years, probably, yeah, more
Decades.
years than I've been around. So with that being said, I really don't have any, the fiscal year 25 CDSs were not included in that. What does that mean? I really don't know. I'm hoping to have a statement on that this week. And as we know, both Senator Collins and Senator King is promoted that bilateral decision to do so. But we just wanted to make sure that we're on it, and any more news comes, we'll feed it out to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I will stand.
Okay.
I just want to start with a thank you to David and SOS Saco Bay for inviting the delegation here. And Pam steals a lot of my thunder getting to go first, but I'm the York County Regional Rep for Senator Angus King's office. My name is Sarah Stanley. My office is also on Main Street in Biddeford, just up the street from Pam, across from the health food store. If you ever need me, I'm always here as a resource. If you have a question, if I don't know the answer to it, I will always do my best to try to find the answer. As Pam said, we don't have a lot of answers right now, but I certainly am happy to meet, discuss, have open dialogue, and get as many answers as we can. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Pam Trinwood. I'm here representing Congresswoman Shelley Pingree, and I've been working on this project for a long, long time. Again, our concern is also, shadows what the other Pam already told you. Our office is very concerned about the budget. The Army Corps was cut 44% from their construction activities and all project funding levels. So we don't know how that's going to affect this project. Also, all constituent-directed funding was taken out of the budget that had already been passed. So some of those projects, and then NOAA, which I heard from already from everyone here, the NOAA project is in serious trouble also. So a lot of these issues that our office and our constituents, the whole delegation is concerned about, is in very red target zone for cuts in the federal government right now. So I just want to warn everyone, we're working as hard as we can and fighting as hard as we can to save as much as we can. And again, when we hear anything at all, we'll let you know. But we do all feel like we're in a little bit of dangerous trouble here. So just wanted to be honest and upfront. And I've been working for the Congresswoman for 12 years, and I've been on this project for all 12 years. So I'd be thrilled to see it really come to fruition, because I kept saying that I could retire when it was done, but it doesn't look good right now. And again, I'm in the Waterville office, but I cover all of her military, and I cover the Army Corps for her. All the dredging projects and all of these projects associated with this is in my basket of portfolio. So thank you, and thank you guys for having this again. We always learn a lot.
Before Justin speaks, I just want to acknowledge Justin, because he's the person that really founded this event 6 years ago. He and the then mayor of Saco came up with the idea to get all these people together, and I hope he's proud of the fact that we've grown it significantly, because it speaks well of him, and we appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Justin.
Thank you, David. I'm very, very proud. Thank you to SOS Saco Bay and the city. It's really just great to see every level of government and multiple agencies represented here. This level of coordination is really critical and really demonstrates our collective commitment to our coastal communities. So I think that's really important. Just a few things of what's happening at the county level, and I know Art Cleaves is down here at the end of the panel table. I'm sure he can fill in anything that I miss, but there was a lot of great work that's taking place at the county level. We obviously are working around the clock to operationalize the dredge after the county purchased the dredge using ARPA dollars. We did decide to move forward with our own operations versus having an outside entity. There's a whole set of challenges that come with that we had discovered throughout the process, really kind of jumping through various bureaucratic hurdles and steps. And it's really our responsibility as a county to cross the T's and dot the I's. I know that the time frame can be frustrating. I think a lot of us were hoping to utilize this critical tool, this regional tool, this dredge season. Obviously, it's March. It's the end of this current dredge season. But we are really having our eyes set for this fall in November. A couple things to get to that point. We've been very active in getting MOU agreements signed by various coastal municipalities, including Saco and Old Orchard Beach, overcoming state and federal permitting hurdles, which are quite extensive, ensuring that funding is available at the local level to assist with the actual implementation and the actual project itself. And then also making these projects cost effective by ensuring that we're planning multiple dredge projects at once. So we can't just say, okay, Saco's ready, so let's jump into the water. Really looking at how do we schedule a few of these in a row, get them ready to go. That'll be more cost efficient for municipalities and for the county. So our expectation is to tackle multiple dredge projects this next dredge season this fall. A couple other quick things that we've been working on alongside the dredge project. We've helped 6 municipalities work towards Category B, or that 5-year storm emergency protective measure for dunes and beaches. And that included a lot of coastal MOU agreements that took some time to work with local municipal officials to do so. We've been assisting in raising National Flood Insurance Program properties along the coast to mitigate future issues. We help municipalities recoup millions of dollars, including hundreds of individuals recoup monies caused by last winter's storms. Our emergency management officials have been working very closely with UNE, so thank you for being here and being a part of that work for coastal modeling. And obviously, we've been working around the clock to try to identify and apply for various state and federal funding. I think our continued ask at the state level is to continue to try to see counties as an appropriate vehicle for implementation of grant-funded projects. I think a lot of times we focus on municipalities for implementation of grants and receiving of grants, and counties are left in the cold. And so I think it's really important that we continue to view us as a viable outlet for state monies. The federal government trusted counties across the country, including here in Maine, to spend once in a generation millions of dollars, $40 million just for York County. So we clearly can be entrusted with that regional coordination and implementation. I think there needs to be a greater focus on allowing the state allowing counties to be that vehicle. We can't speak for other counties, but I would say between York and Cumberland County, we're rocking it. We are setting the tone and the leadership level that's absolutely needed to bring all levels of government together. We're the glue that can really help, especially when municipalities can't do a lot of this work on their own. They need some regional component. Counties can fill that gap, and we are every single day. So thank you, David. I really appreciate it.
Not to interrupt you, but Donna, one of the LD1 amendment asks was to make the county, turn the county into an available, so the county can actually apply for funds from LD1. Can you talk, is that going to happen? Can you talk to that? Donna's a state senator from Saco, by the way, and also a very big supporter of this event, and I'm grateful to her.
Okay, thank you. So on LD1, I do serve on the Housing and Economic Development Committee that heard that bill. We did put in an amendment, as you say, to add county government to those entities that would be entitled to apply for grants under LD1. My sense in the committee is that that is going to be supported. And we do expect that bill to be voted out tomorrow afternoon. Is the second work session tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna.
So we do have, going back to, sorry, Jen, Jen Thalhauser is the project manager for the Army Corps project. We're really glad that she could come here today, and she's going to provide hopefully a quick update of what's going on and hopefully be able to continue working on it. We think that she will be. So go ahead, Jen.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to give the positive news despite all the funding uncertainties. So we do have enough money to proceed with the designs for the phase 1 of the project, which is the spur jetty. Phase 2 is beach renourishment that will happen after the spur jetty construction is complete. So last year at this time, I was telling you what we were going to do, and I'm happy to report we passed a number of big milestones. We completed some additional borings that were done under where the spur jetty will be constructed. And we also completed the wave modeling. So this is an updated wave modeling that we've modeled 3 different storm scenarios, actually 6 different storm scenarios. And I'm going to get into the details too much, I think, if I continue, but that information was critical to feeding our designs for the spur jetty, determining rock size, determining side slopes, the crest width, and lots of details that we have plugged into what we're calling a 65% plan. So we have our 65% design meeting next week. And before I forget, I want to mention that it would be really important for me to talk to Pete and Will before I leave today so we can share those model results, because they both were key pieces of putting that model together. So we want to thank them too. And then we have a pre-application meeting with Maine DEP to get that last box checked on the environmental permits that we're working on. And we are proceeding full speed ahead to get to a point where we are ready to advertise a contract this fall. We, as you all know, need that funding in order to advertise the contract, but we are going to assume that we're going to get it, and we're just going to keep moving without any delays. So I have only good things to report. We're on schedule since we developed that first schedule last summer. So, and just thanks to everyone for their help, especially the city and SOS.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Jody McPhail, Mayor of Saco. First off, I would just like to thank everyone sitting in this room for all of the support over the years that has been provided and helped from all of our delegation, especially the state. After last year's events of the storms, it almost took that to put everybody together on the same page. And I've seen that over the last year. We have a lot going on in Saco, thanks to Jen, Justin, and the county, Art. A little disappointing we didn't get the dredge, but we understand all of the logistics and everything to make sure that it's done properly. So we're looking forward to next year and bringing the sand in. For me personally, next year I'm hoping to work with our new Director of Public Works, Travis Moore, in using the environmental aspects of rebuilding the dunes. Bringing in the Christmas trees, bringing in those items to see if it's a possibility to help the restructure. And that's another one for us in Saco that we're working on, is working with our residents and our homeowners. We have big gaps along the coastal line of the private property and the city property. So it's a difficult task for us to be able to get the dunes replanted because we have to work on the agreements with the homeowners and coming up with that correct plan that's going to benefit everyone and how to do it. So that is a big task on our agenda for the next year. We were fortunate, we had a break this year, so it's a good opportunity for us to be able to really look at the plans that we have in place so that moving forward, we can protect the shoreline. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say a couple words, excuse me, not following up on what the mayor has to say, but one of the most important things that we're going to be doing over the next couple months is our budget. And we know that there is opportunities that we are trying for in other grants, but I think it's going to become the responsibility of local officials to come up with some funding for the dredge, for additional sand, for a sheet pile wall to help with other areas of the riverfront, the waterfront. So from my perspective, I think the major thrust for us will be local funding, because I hear it every day. You know, people want certain things down there, and we as a city staff can only do so much unless we have the funding to do it. So we'll be working with the city council, and I know there'll be a lot of people working with us to get that accomplished. Thank you.
Thank you. Roman, you can turn your nameplate around so people will know.
Oh, thank you.
You're on TV.
Comment and then a question. I want to thank Nathan and Lauren for what you offered. I'm interested in the Shore Corps. It struck me as something that individual waterfront homeowners, property owners can do to help, and it seemed like clear guidance, so I'm interested in trying to get that out to more people. And then I think a question for Will and Pete. So from where we sit in Biddeford, correct me if I'm wrong here, I think I understood that we determined we would not be eligible for FEMA Category B or G because we didn't have pre-storm data, but it looked to me like Pete did have pre-storm data, so I just wanted to explore that a little bit, maybe Will.
We definitely have pre-storm data. I think, yeah, there are a number of things we could follow up on afterwards, Lauren. I think when I remember doing the calculations, we didn't reach the level that would, by my non-professional survey work, would need to do that. But I'd be more than happy to revisit that, and Lauren's really a key expert on helping us decide that. So,
okay.
Yeah, we'd be more than happy to follow up.
Yeah. We've been monitoring shoreline erosion for a number of years along the Biddeford beaches, but I don't know if that would meet what you need for Category B information. I mean, it's just to the seaward toe of the dune and then the mean high water line. So those characteristics we talked about earlier, but that doesn't really get at elevation and volume. That's more of what Will's flights would provide. But it does give you some information in terms of the horizontal changes that are occurring. So.
Yeah, so for the pre-storm data, we did use that 2020 LiDAR as our pre-storm data, so everyone had that. I think Will also used some of his more recent data. So it wasn't the survey data, it was the total water elevation or total water level with the still water plus the wave run-up. All the dunes, even after the storm, were still higher than that total water level to protect against a 5-year storm at the cross sections we were looking at.
Okay. I'll look forward to learning more about that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks. Mike Berman, City Council for Saco, Ward 4. That's the Coastal Ward. This is a great conference. Thank you so much. So good to see all the action happening at the various levels. Slightly pessimistic news from our federal delegation. Really great news, from, I think, from our state and county efforts. Saco has a lot going on. I won't reiterate what the mayor and city administrator have already said. I guess a request from me, coming from a local perspective, is some more guidance from the state and county on what role the towns need to play to integrate into your efforts. It's exciting to see so much going on, but it's a little bit dizzying, I think, for local government and for homeowners about what the changes are, about what the local plan needs to take as opposed to state and county efforts, and then how and when and what we need to do with local homeowners in order to bring them on board. I think we're kind of that last final step in integrating these plans and some real clear communication about what the local plan should encompass versus the county and state level plans, how we communicate to our homeowners and residents about what's available to them and what mitigations they should be taking and what level of coordination we should provide would, I think, really help us out in getting that final leg done and getting the homeowners on board. So the more we can integrate these levels, I think the better off we'll be. Thank you, and really exciting.
So we're working on that in one way I know in particular is that there's a UNE class on climate change, and Jen, who's here today, has brought some students over to study beach management, and I'm going to engage them with the county, and hopefully that, between the county and these students that we can get definition. I think that's a really important thing.
Yeah, really exciting, and really exciting to see the county take some initiative. It's definitely a regional approach. We can't protect our beach alone. It's a regional problem. But again, kind of navigating what roles each level of government plays, and then how we can implement that final step. You know, guidebook guidance, model legislation, and model ordinances, model programs, and really clarity about where the state and county are available to help us implement those would be, I think, super helpful for me.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I had one other thing. I know we already talked about LD1, but I just wanted to also bring folks' attention to another piece of legislation on the state level, which is LD 560, which is a bipartisan bill that is co-sponsored by Representative Gramlich, Representative Copeland, to have a $75 million bond put out to the voters in order to improve coastal climate resiliency and work on these engineered beaches. So just wanted to put that in folks' radar. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. That would be amazing to get. Abby, do you want to turn your, so we
Oh,
know
yes,
you,
sorry.
Abby's
Thought it
from
was
Southern Maine
double-sided.
Planning and Development. And I also wanted to give Abby a shout out because last, I think it was November or December, that SMPDC and the University of New England put together a climate change conference at UNE, and it was really good. And we hope you'll do that again. And I hope to make more people aware of it. I think you do a lot of great stuff, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Abby Sherwin. I'm the Resilience Division Director at Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission, or SMPDC. We provide technical support and planning services to our 39 member municipalities, including Biddeford, Saco, and Old Orchard Beach. We focus a lot on climate adaptation planning and also coastal resilience work. We support municipalities with scoping out projects and also pursuing grant funds for priority climate projects, including coastal resilience projects, and have been involved in a number of municipally specific as well as regional coastal resilience planning efforts. So really focused on helping communities understand what their options are for understanding vulnerabilities and taking action to increase their resilience to coastal hazards. And then also supporting the county's wonderful efforts with all of the beach and dune restoration work.
That's really important. Art, can you make sure that microphone is turned on before you?
You promised me you wouldn't put me in the spot, David.
It's okay, we heard you.
I don't have any, I'm Art Cleaves, York County Emergency Management. I don't have much to add. Commissioner Chanette and Lauren have covered everything that we've needed to talk about for Category B and the reimbursements from FEMA. I would take a minute to just thank Representative Gramlich and Senator Bailey for all of your help and support from the state level and all of the departments here as well. I will add one thing. The engineering reports that were filed with FEMA went in on last Friday, and I think they were approved, and now it's just a matter of working its way over the next several months through the FEMA process. So they were all approved, thanks to the good engineering you did, Lauren. So I think we're good with that, David.
Okay, thank you, Art, and thank all of you for coming. So we have, oh, what's that? So we have another half hour that we can use, and I'm going to let Kevin Roche, the president of Save Our Shores, come up and hopefully ask a lot of important questions and get a lot of people talking about whatever we need to talk about, but thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Sure, anybody can ask.
Before we do that.
Yeah.
Art, I think you're the right person to ask this, but I'm not sure. Do we know what the total amount of funding requested from FEMA for Category B reimbursement is? Do we have a sense of that? Just wondering.
Sure. Say that again, Peter.
Do we have a sense of what the total amount of funding being requested from FEMA for Category B reimbursement is?
I'm just working on Saco, Wells, and Old Orchard Beach, and it's around 2.5 million total, like engineering, coastal modeling, field investigations, construction.
Okay, and then somebody said there were 6 communities, so 2.5.
Kennebunkport did sand scraping, and I'm not sure what that cost was, and Ogunquit is.
It's a little under 400,000.
Okay.
Okay, all right, so we're a significant amount of money. Okay, thanks.
No, Anybody else have any questions? I know you have to leave. The Senate's conducting business today. Thank you, Lori. No. for all the, yeah. Okay, so with that said, Kevin, you can take control.
Well, thank you from my side for everyone to be here. Today's St. Patrick's Day, but it's also the 5th anniversary of COVID and everything being shut down. And COVID, on a positive note, kind of gave us momentum, because where did everyone go for their mental health? They went to the beach. And now 5 years later, we have a lot of political uncertainty, but everyone, I think, is united in this room, whether you're of one political party or another, of the value, tax value, environmental value, residential value, commercial value of making sure our shoreline is protected. It's not just for Saco, it's not just climate change, sea level rise, but it's also, you know, our jetty issue that we're working on as well. So thank you for everyone. Everyone here has, you know, helped us get to us this point. So I want to kind of keep this open within questions with the panels here, but I'll throw out the first question for anyone who wants to take it. We have representatives from Old Orchard and Biddeford here. The dredge program is up and running, and we did not dredge this season. It was absolutely not cost effective to do that for the amount of sand that was going to be permitted, and for only 2 communities, basically at the ready, Wells and Saco. So the question is, how do we collectively get to November to make sure that dredging can happen, not just for Saco, but also for as many communities around us? We're very interested in Old Orchard and Biddeford next to us to have something that they could propose. But what is the best, what needs to be done to be ready for November?
I just have one comment. Don't underestimate the timing required for the regulatory permits on the federal side. The sampling, the testing, there's a plan that has to be put in place before sampling testing is done, then there's lab work, and it takes a lot of time. So I would say to make sure that get on that as soon as possible.
To add to that, I think one of the big things is actually finding your appropriate sediment sources. You know, when we look at most dredging that's occurred in the state in the past, it's been as a beneficial reuse of a federal project. So really defining where these sources are, how much sediment's available, and then looking at specifically at the testing that might be required. Is it in the littoral cell of where you're proposing to put the sand? Is it outside of it? And then also the timing of year restrictions are going to be really important. And then making sure that, you know, with the capacity and capabilities of the dredge, you do have some options in terms of the way to do things. But is onshore placement the appropriate response, or is nearshore placement the appropriate response? And if it's nearshore placement, I don't think that qualifies for category B or G funding. So things to remember and things to think about.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Jen, because it's quality of sand. We were through that back in 2017 for the river dredge. That was a holdup. But it's quantity, quality, and placement. Quantity, Lauren, you guys had just completed this survey out on the river for quantity?
Yes, so the Army Corps surveys their federal navigation channels, and that's publicly available data every year, but then we just recently completed a bathymetric survey around the Camp Ellis Pier, which would be the city of Saco dredge area.
So maybe a question or a comment combined, federal channel with the Army Corps, around the pier. We want to maximize as much sand as we could dredge, because we'd like to maybe report to our friends in Biddeford that it could be available, but then you guys would have to also get ready or permit yourself for also location as well. So, but yes, maximum sand is to get to first, and then quality and where it goes.
I have a question for Jen. So if Biddeford and Saco both wanted to go through the 408, Section 408 review, if they would like to utilize dredge material from the Federal Navigation Channel, could they like cost share like the suitability testing that's required for that permitting?
So the suitability determination isn't part of the 408 program, but that's the Section 40410 permit. I think they could probably both request a sampling plan from the Army Corps together, but I think I'll have to refer you to Pete Olmsted at the Maine Regulatory Office to get a definite answer on that. But I'll help get you in touch with him.
Another follow-up on that. I know in one of your slides, Lauren, you had something about that the project can't be part, for eligible FEMA funding, it can't be part of a federal placement project. Does that also include the federal dredge location, or does it just include the placement?
So it's just the placement. So the Army Corps, historically, it's been their navigation projects, and they've been placing on the beach for beneficial use, but it wasn't a beach nourishment project. It was a navigation project, so those are still eligible. At the point, if they do make it a beach nourishment project, then it would no longer be eligible.
I have a question for, again, just the general group here, but for individual homeowners to do their own dune planting. We don't have Ferry Beach here necessarily, but they had wild success with well, do we? Someone here from Ferry Beach? Sorry. What can an individual property owner do to maximize right now through state funding or a local municipality to basically redo their dunes, and where could they get their funds?
Yeah, I'm not aware of much in the way of funding for private property owners to do work on their own property from the state. I mean, I did mention the Homeowners Resiliency Program from LD1. That would be grants to improve the structures, the structure of their home, specifically their roofs and their basements. But for dune plantings, I don't have any ideas for you.
I'll say that, I mean, the dune restoration fund that is available, and I think there were 8 applications, Nathan, is that right? That's not for individual homeowners, but that's for municipalities for homeowners. But, you know, individual homeowners can undertake a lot of kind of best management practices activities that really are relatively low cost, like putting out fencing, planting the dune with dune grass is, you know, there is an expense associated with that, but trying to trap sand is always a good thing, so fencing is a kind of a low-cost thing that could be implemented. You know, I always say this, but trying to consider not just thinking about your individual property, but thinking about working with your neighbors. Because anytime projects get bigger, they get more efficient on everything, from cost to permitting to pretty much everything. So just add that.
I have a question, Kevin. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks. I think Kevin has just pointed out a real hole in my mind. When my constituents ask what they can do to protect their houses, right now my answer is sort of like the answer of this panel, is we're not sure. But the municipality is really well suited to coordinate this kind of activity if we had better guidance on what was allowed, so some ease in helping homeowners get the permits or permit by rules that are needed, and especially some statewide or regional grants that would help reimburse those costs, maybe through the municipality, this would be a real opportunity to put that kind of last mile step in to protect. Individual homeowners doing their own work doesn't really get the job done. You just create pockets of protection surrounded by pockets of erosion, and that's not actually going to solve the problem. But if we can step in as a county or as municipalities and help coordinate these efforts, especially, again, with regulatory ease and maybe reimbursement through grants or otherwise, that's an area that we could really make an impact, and that I see a real gap in this discussion about how we can facilitate that. So just for this representatives and state people around, I think that's an area that we could really see some work that would make a big impact.
I have a question to Will. When you pointed out the beach scraping, who did that? Did they pay for that themselves? And how was that handled? And maybe that's something that maybe we could do more of.
To my knowledge, on Middle Beach in particular, it was all private property owners that paid for that themselves. Pete might have more information. So to be clear, like I am just observing what's there. So we have this wonderful natural experiment where people make different decisions, and then we get to see the consequences of their different decisions. And so I have not been in touch with the individual property owners, but rather just monitoring what everyone is doing, and we will continue to do that and continue to report on the effectiveness of everyone's varied approaches. But I agree, coordination is great, and Pete has.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that, and this gets a little bit of what Michael was saying. So the example from Fortune's Rocks Beach in Bidford, we review all of this beach scraping permit applications that come in, because they have to go through MGS first before they even go to DEP. And there were dozens of each individual property owners because there was no coordination even amongst property owners. So neighbors were getting permits while other neighbors weren't, and then the other neighbors would get the permits later, when they could have all gone in on one simple permit. So for instance, a great example I think in this is the town of Kennebunkport organized 11 conservation properties first that the town owned, and then subsequently they worked with property owners for a second beach scraping in the fall. They did one beach scraping in the spring and then a second in the fall, and the community organized that and worked with all the different owners to get all of that information together. There was a select board member who was very good with a drone and did basically the imagery and everything that was needed for that, but the coordination was exactly what you're talking about. So it was much more efficient. It was basically two permits for 22 properties, 11 and 11. And I think that's kind of the way you do it. There's a coordination that occurs at the city/municipal scale with the municipal property owners themselves. That kind of eases the burden of having to do it all by themselves. Because, again, having 20 adjacent property owners apply for 20 of the same exact permits, doing the same exact thing, doesn't make any sense. So.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the model I would like. And if there's a guidance available or how-tos available or assistance in how to help coordinate that, I think that'd be really useful. Because again, we're in this weird situation where it's a public resource, right? The coastline benefits us all, but left to private property owners to implement the protections. And that's just a little bit broken, right? We need some better guidance on this and some public assistance in protecting this public resource, and so some help for the towns in doing that, I think would be really appreciated, or even just examples of best practices like that, super helpful.
Could I just add one more point to Pete as well, that there is, I think, significant benefit in coordinating amongst property owners because you can see the property lines in all the plantings. And those are real vulnerabilities when we're not coordinating across neighbors, and you see the property line in the planting, and that's a weak spot where the dune grass is not going to be as productive, it's not going to be as resilient, and we're going to create vulnerabilities in our beaches.
I'll just add too, I mean, from a permitting standpoint, I mean, we say the same things, right? Working together is the way to go, right? And just using vegetation is really effective if done. If you give it time, right? So that's why we put it, like, sort of think of these things as no regret strategies. Even just fencing is helpful because it allows the dune grass to grow, right? If you just don't step on it so much, you can encourage nature to grow. And so, I think those are the sorts of things that we would put forward anyways, working together across property owners. There is the permit by Rule 16A, which is, so that's a more streamlined permitting process for planting of native dune vegetation. So it doesn't necessarily address the funding piece of it, but from the regulatory side, it does, allow that practice to make it easier. And we do see multiple property owners, like Pete said, apply together, and so that can be really effective. I want to just ask if I can just, looking at our Land Bureau folks at DEP in the back, if any of you want to add any thoughts to the guidance. No, okay. This is going back to dredging, but I mean, I think our experience with the dredge work was just early and often is the best opportunity. I mean, that's what we often recommend for DEP. So I think we were able to, like, for example, in this last several months, have some really quick conversations to shore up some permitting questions and move forward, but that was for a more limited amount of scope. So if we want to do larger projects, consider a longer lead time. And so I think all those points that were mentioned about the kinds of information are the things that we're going to ask as well. So just really encourage like a pre-application conversation with our Southern Maine regional office.
I'll just add that one of the things that Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission does, in addition to providing individual support to municipalities, is to connect municipalities with each other to share lessons learned and information. So we'd be happy to connect you with Kenny Bunkport so you can learn a little bit more about what they did.
Can I just add one more thought there, Kevin, too? I mean, just to use this as an example, if there are specific practices like we're talking about with plantings, okay, that's fairly small in scope, very effective. It's helpful for us to identify those from a permitting standpoint to understand where to streamline those, and we can actually evaluate specific practices, materials, what environment, what landscape they're in, because our regulations are generally fairly specific to what resource they're in. When we know what practices there are, it's much easier to think about streamlining them. There's other conceptual things that are more difficult, and we're also collectively trying to learn what is the more resilient practice. So, I think the way that we're thinking about it is where it's specific and known, let's try to make sure we streamline that as best as possible. And when we're trying to learn, let's share case studies. But some of these things are going to be bigger and, of course, obviously take more time. So the more we think about it from a practice orientation, it's really helpful for us to think of, hear those specific ideas. Yeah.
I'm just imagining a scenario in which if a neighbor put in a permit for a scraping or scheduled a scraping or a dune replanting or a replenishment, if there was some way of noticing the neighbors and facilitating their getting involved in a project. Hey, your neighbor's got a permit in, you can add your property to that permit just by sending a letter. Right, here's what's happening. Or a statewide program that, hey, if you're doing one property, if you expand to your two neighbors, there's some grant reimbursement for the project because it's going to be more protective. Go call your neighbor, tell them to get involved in a project. Right, or just some way of facilitating that when it's already happening. I'm just imagining like this, the driveway guys who come by and say, we're doing your neighbors, we'll do you for half price because we're already there with our equipment. Getting systems like that set up for this coastal restoration, just to let people know, so you're not seeing 20 permits from 20 neighbors at different points in the season. But when the first one goes in, it triggers a cascade of communication trying to coordinate that. And whether that's the state communicating with the municipality, saying, hey, you have some permits coming in, you might want to reach out to the community and get them to coordinate, whether that's statewide efforts, whether that's SMPDC getting involved and helping that coordination. But it just seems silly that we don't have that going on right now.
There was a dune planting in Ferry Beach a few years back, and I know you monitored it. Did you also help get the work done, or were you just following up on it? Do you know what I mean? You know which area I mean?
Near the seawall?
No, it was beyond the seawall. So if you were going north, it was in between like the end of the seawall and the state park. Because I know on one of your presentations a few years back, you cited it as, at that time, as a survivor. And
Oh, you're
Do you know
referring to the project after the Patriots Day storm?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There was an 850-foot section of dune that was rebuilt just north of, I think it's Fairhaven Avenue.
Yeah.
That was, I think, a model project because it instead of, and it was, I think, undertaken by the Ferry Beach Park Association, if I'm correct. And it was a model project in that it didn't try to restore the dune exactly where it was lost originally. There was enough room at the time to actually restore a much larger protective ridge and use the natural elevation of the back dune to make the dune much higher and more protective, and then allow the front dune to kind of do what it does and erode over time. And that project, I think, I mean, it still affords some level of protection now, even this much later. And that was completed, I think, in 2009. So that was just a good model project of relatively low cost. I think it cost around $20,000 total. You know, the city, of course, brought in truckloads of sand to rebuild that dune. So, but there was a lot of volunteers that planted the dune grass. So it was kind of kept at a low-cost project. But it was very effective given how high the level of erosion is along that stretch of shoreline.
Yeah, it actually prevented a lot of damage from those January storms, because if you walk down toward there, when you get to that dune, those homes were a lot less affected than the ones that were not behind it, so.
I want to throw this question out. I know, so I'm going to try to combine a kind of a question here. Of course, dunes need sand, and going back to dredging, what are the holdups or hiccups of dredging offshore to kind of, I know the scraping term has been used, but sand blowing or something that way? One area, Lori's not here right now, is Ocean Park got hit pretty good, and Goose Fair has been a problem where I think one day it's going to be back clogged up completely. What are the issues about offshore dredging and sand blowing onto areas of need?
I can start on that one, and then other folks jump in. The big thing is finding the right locations and source of sediment. Our coastline, you know, we do have sand up on the beaches and out to about depth of closure, and sometimes beyond that. We don't have tons and tons of offshore sand deposits like they do in some other states. So that finding that sediment source is really, really important. An appropriate sediment source that is compatible in terms of grain size, or at least close, and then is not, you know, exorbitantly far for where you have to dredge it from to get it back up onto the shoreline. So. Again, the majority of projects we've seen in the past have been harbor or river dredge projects as a result of that.
We know where most of our sand is, Camp Ellis. It's in Scarborough, so,
yeah,
we wave to it. So.
But you do bring up, I think, what is an important point, and I don't know what the status of this is, and it's starting to be discussed over the years, and that's part of a core program, and maybe Jen can speak about this more, but called regional sediment management. And the concept there, and it's been implemented on very, very large sections of shoreline. I don't know if it's been done on a small bay-wide scale like Saco Bay, but that is the origin of sediment for all of Saco Bay pretty much is the Saco River and erosion of sand from the White Mountains. So sand comes down the river and goes northwards over time and ends up in Scarborough, clogging the Scarborough River. So the idea is, on a small scale, of recycling that sand. So when you dredge the Scarborough River, you bring the sand all the way back down to Camp Ellis, return the sand to where it would have gone naturally, and then let that cycle play itself over again. And I don't know what the status of that is, but it was something that was discussed, I guess, about a decade ago.
Can I just, just 1 second? So we do have the website, the Regional Sediment Management website I can share with you all, but in terms of locally, we actually have a survey scheduled for Scarborough this spring or summer, probably late spring. And the idea is to start talking about bringing that back to Camp Ellis. But it's early, we need the survey, but we understand that cycle and we want to encourage that, so. Yeah.
I sent out to a couple of you an email about wave attenuation devices. I know Pete Hanrahan spoke to, there's more than just the pyramids of such, but I'd like to get it to the state officials, including Brian, about a look at allowing a project somewhere, maybe in front of this Ferry Park State Beach. Maybe there's a play in Biddeford of putting a demo project of these WADs in tidal waters for the first time. The video I'll send is the protection it does to the St. Petersburg Skyway Bridge. It's been a year in, and it's been wildly successful. It's very, very interesting to watch the accretion of not just sand, but seagrass, so, and also the wildlife, the fish and everything. So, all right, we're almost at the point of conclusion here. Any final thoughts from anyone? No? All right. Well, I'd like first a personal big thank you to David for putting do all the grunt work and putting all the speakers together. Highly appreciated as we try to collectively connect the dots to all levels of government. Again, I can't reiterate enough that this is a prime example in these difficult political times of governments coming together from all sectors to make things happen. I mean, it's not easy, you know, being $2 trillion in annual debt is not, you know, I know choices have to be made, but I feel like, I mean, of course, we're personally attached, but this is exhibit A of how government can work and actually save us money, but also make our life a lot better. So thank you very much, and I'll let David conclude. There's coffee and water in the back still.
I'll post slides from these presentations, so if anybody's interested, I'll send an email with a link to them. Also, I know Brian has a couple of pages, and I know the community resilience grant page, and I'll send the links to those. He's got all sorts of information up there about things that we can do, and I would say that we should try and just take advantage of whatever we can take advantage of, and hopefully there's enough to allow us to survive all this. But I want to thank everyone for coming, and we plan to do this again next year, and we'll see what we have to talk about then. Thanks.